Ara parlarà la Maruša Zorec. Maruša is architect and professor at the Faculty of Architecture in Ljubljana. She's working on a small-scale projects, mostly in the field of renovation of the architectural heritage. And today she's going to speak about Plečnik, the study house restoration in Ljubljana.
Hello. Thank you very much for the invitation. It is always a pleasure to come to this beautiful city, and especially it's really nice to see what a vivid discussion it happens among architects, and especially if they discuss about renovation of old buildings. This is not so often in my country, and I think it's really nice to share the principles, the approaches, and often the doubts and dilemmas that we have in that kind of processes. I was asked to show you a very small house, a renovation of a very small house of our architect, Jože Plečnik, which in fact was for a small period also a place where his students came and learned about architecture. I was asked by Judith to explain also if those students during the time staying in the house or before and after gained something from these spaces that they were attending. And that's why I'll try to show you also the students, their work, and how I think that the life, work, and teaching of Jože Plečnik affected their architecture. So on this image you see Jože Plečnik, while he was still young and smiling. That was the time when he was studying and working in the office and studio of Otto Wagner in Vienna. Here you see Wagner and Jože Plečnik smiling here in the group of his students in his ateliers. All the times later he was photographed very, very seriously in a very strict composition, sitting like a serious architect. And so his architecture in a way is a very big monumental architecture that was done also in Vienna and in Prague. Firstly, he lived a couple of years in Vienna, and later he was teaching in Prague, when in the year 1920 he was invited to return back to his city, to Ljubljana, and start teaching in Ljubljana, where our university and faculty of architecture was established. During the period he was working in Ljubljana, this was mostly before the Second World War, he established really beautiful masterpieces of these public areas that we are enjoying today as the Riven embankment or the marketplace and the cemetery. But these are all big scale projects, very monumental public buildings. But more or less we are going to see another building of him, the building where he lived, which is a small, tiny, very simple and modest house. When he came to Ljubljana, he was first teaching in old technical building that he restored a little bit, and this is the building where he was teaching before the Second World War. And the students who came out of this school were very important students who marked the second half of the 20th century in our country. Later, during the war times, from 43 till 46, he moved from this school to his house because the school was closed because of the war. And afterwards, he moved to the school that we are teaching today, using the same ways of teaching, the same ways of studio, of vertical studio teaching, as he was teaching at that time in Ljubljana, and as he somehow learned in the studio of Wagner and inherited it, and that brought in his own way to Ljubljana. The school was somehow established by another architect, Ivan Burnik, and Plečnik teaching with him, but later on, after the Second World War, mostly marked by his student, the student of Jože Plečnik. This was Edvard Ravnikar. And Edvard Ravnikar was studying with Plečnik before the Second World War, and this is one of his worst works in the 50s. But later on, with all the doubts of this classical architecture that was taught by Plečnik before the war, and knowing that there is something new going on in the world around, like Le Corbusier's work and also Frank Lloyd Wright, he went to work in Corbusier's office for a couple of months, this Raunicar, and there he learned a lot about modern architecture. But when he came back, you can see in the 50s, he established an architecture that is somehow a mixture of it. It's not a strict modernistic architecture, but an architecture that is very much rooted to his professor. This is the library of Jože Plečnik that you can see where Raunicar was working on that project with Plečnik together. He was drawing the cornice and putting all these bricks together. And you see the first work of Raunicar, which is still resembling a lot on the work of Plečnik. And later works by Raunicar using the brick in a very, let's say, modern way. That's the 60s and 70s built the commercial and the most important public center of Ljubljana, the Republic Square. There are some other students who came from the school of Raunicar that marked this architecture of the post-war period, like Vinko Glanc here with the Plečnik on the photo, or Edo Miheus, who was constructing the renovation part of the house itself together with Plečnik, or Emil Davinček, an architect who established a free corridor system schools in Ljubljana. He built about 30 schools with an open corridor system that was somehow deriving from the school of and thoughts he gained from the Jože Plečnik. As Danilo First, who was working with Plečnik here together with Plečnik on a renovation of a villa, the way of teaching of Plečnik was learning by doing. So they were drawing together with Plečnik and working sometimes also on the side. So the studio in our time also means that the students are there present working very practical cases. And here as well, Anton Bitens, an architect who was working also together with Plečnik as his assistant, renovating this monastery or later working on some church buildings, as Vlasto Kopač working on a lot and even more like those last one with the tradition. So many students who came from the school of Jože Plečnik were working with renovation fields, with the renovating of the castles or as a kind of this small cottage settlements, as for instance, Dušan Grabrian, who was studying the Bosnian and Macedonian architecture, also a student of Le Corbusier later, but working mostly on the fields of documentation on architecture heritage from, let's say, Balkans. And as well as Svetozar Križaj, also a student of Plečnik, and that's his building, where you can still trace from all these examples that you see the influences perhaps that they gained from the house and from the works in the field, but also by working, drawing, and studying in his vertical studio at the Faculty of Architecture. Later on, some architects who didn't even study with Plečnik, but produced a modernistic architecture in the 70s, very much influenced and connected with the tradition, with the context, with the materiality and detail. That was, I think, the influence and the message of the Plečnik's work. So we are striving and striving for this architecture that is lots of it also being demolished in our last 20 years by protecting it, putting it under the protection of the heritage, and through this saving this architecture. Plečnik, in the meantime, I can say was quite recognized, but still some of the buildings of him are quite endangered. I will just show you the case how we renovated the house where he was living and working and also teaching for a certain period. This renovation took place from 1909 till 15, but he did certain interventions on the house already himself. So the house is done of 4 different editions, and I will explain you the process of the study as well as the process of the renovation with some, let's say, more conservative parts and some more radical parts. This is the house that was bought by Plečnik's brother in the 1915. It's behind the church in the suburbia of Ljubljana, with an intention that the whole family, there were 3 brothers and 1 sister, would once live in this house. And this was a very simple, modest house, as you see here, the old plans that we found. In our country, this research usually is done by a company who is having architects and researchers, and we get it already as a kind of a conservation plan. But during the process, when we started to work on the house, we already reassembled some other plans and some other photos as a documentation that help us taking some decisions what to do with the house. Later, when Plečnik, so on this plan, you already see when Plečnik moved to the house, he was entering this way. And later he did a small staircase to the attic rooms that were above this area. And all this area was put for rent, so he was never living in this part along the street. He was always living in the back and dreaming to build something also even more behind, to build an addition. There are writings that he was thinking while traveling with a stipendium from Wagner School. He was traveling Italy, and he was writing back that he dreams to live once in a tower. Like he was also designing certain examples how to add to this existing house a new house, and this is the plan of this addition that was added to the primer house. So you can see how these steps were happening. This was the first house, and then later he moved to this area and built some rooms on the attic. And the house had a huge garden. So he was dreaming, and later first he built this addition close to the garden. So this area was still a kitchen, and the part where his the lady that he was cooking for him lived here. But this was put for rent for shops and for some sisters or Notre Dame. And this is the tower, how you see how as the first step it was built. It's a round tower building with a pitched roof, and there in the ground floor he was living, and in the first floor for a while his brother, who was a doctor, was living, but he was a very vivid person, so they didn't come along together very well. So the brother moved out, and Plečnik was living in this part alone. So here you see him. We found all these old photos. Well, at the entrance to this house, this part now is covered, and this part of the interior. But firstly, he was entering through this area. You see here, when he built later a canopy and a small room with 6 columns to allow this entrance from the northern part and all the visitors to stay in this entrance part. But later on, in the 1928, he bought also this house along the street. So this allowed him to get a better access to the garden. So this is the last phase where he built this part that is so-called winter garden. So this part that you see here was always for rent, and also this house was a shop, but he was living here at the back and having a better access to all the garden that he was also renting. But this winter garden had a very good communication and very good views with the garden itself. This is a bee house. This is this winter garden, and these are some original photos. So here you see this room with 6 columns, you see the tower, and you see this winter garden addition. There are some photos of him when he was older. He got this dog from his students, and here are some photos in the school when he was already after the war still teaching here. There is a photo of his students probably visiting him after the war, and this is the house at the back that was all grown with vine leaves. And these students were attending his classes from 43 till 46 when the classes were established, and at the school where our faculty is already today. And here is he sitting along this house at that time. Plečnik died in 1957, and at that time, after the war, he was not really very much appreciated. He was, his best times were before the Second World War. After the war, he was a strong believer, so he was a little bit put on the side. He had some works, he was teaching partly, but still, when he died, he was already recognized as an important architect. So his nephew, who inherited the building, he took the photos of the state just at the time of his death. So those photos served us as a kind of documentation to which state we would like to bring the house back. But I must say that the house didn't had many really changes. It was during all those years, although in our country so many changes happened after the war, the house was preserved very well till the 70s with all the furnishing. There were some small additions on the part along the street and on the facade, where the Museum of Architecture, who got the house in the 1974, organized a new entrance to the house through this door. The house is very small, so all the guided tours that go through to the house happen in small groups. So they are organized in 7 people, guided by a custodian, a student of art history. Somehow these are really devoted persons, so it's a very individual walk through the house. And when a group of visitors come, or a bus or something, they need to be somehow organized in this entrance part. So mostly the part of the renovation happened in this area where we were dealing and organizing some spaces as a kind of a small visitor center for the people to stay. This is the state of the rooms, how they were before the renovation. And when we started, I was really asking myself, do we really need to do something? It is like a palimpsest. There are rooms where he, during his stays, works, and of course also teaching, he resembles materials, gifts, and of course many tests of materials, how and where to use them in his public buildings. There were in fact some installation, there were radiators, and there was not a good heating system in the house. And of course, when we started to work with the house, we realized it was really, really very poorly built. He built everything mostly with his hands. There were almost no plaster between the bricks. And in fact, there was not really any proper fire protection, and the construction was quite very bad. You see here on the plan that this is mostly the house that is really highly protected. This is protected as the state monument #1. That means that you can't mostly change anything. And this part along the street is also part of this state protection, but still it was not protected so strictly. And this, what is white, was not owned by the museum. There was a couple living here, and you see how they had this area arranged. There was a car parked here, and the courtyard, the small courtyard, it was kind of a service courtyard of this couple. So the city then, who gained the whole museum, they decided to find a new place for this couple who are renting this place and reorganize the whole. And they ordered first this conservation plan. So this is called the conservation plan, where we have a kind of a valorization of the whole area. So what is here violetly painted, that means this is the highest priority. This is where you can't almost do and touch anything. And that what is yellow and even blue, the blue you can also demolish. So this was the first basis, and of course lots of research with all the paintings, all the materials, all the wooden elements were done before we started working. And when we came, we started to think about the organization, because I think with the renovation projects, the organization is very important. As we heard in the previous lecture, the movement through the building is, I think, a very important task. When we started working, they had already a plan that had a building permission. That means that we could do, and we were asked to come just to do some details. The details about the glazing, the facade, and everything that is somehow all the new elements. Mostly everything was already decided. So here in the middle, it was planned to have a toilet. And all this part, they were mostly organized. Everything was organized like it was. So there was the old entrance and the entrance lobby and a small museum and a small lecture room here in this corner room. So when we visited the place and we saw the site, we saw that these rooms, they were in a state like that. So we saw that they are nice, that they are vaulted, and we thought it is a pity to have a toilet in this position. So we started to think to reorganize this plan that we got, and we were allowed to reorganize it also till the end. So we proposed that here in the middle we put the entrance room, like a small loggia, a small shop where you come and introduce with the guide, and you can wait and circulate around this room in the center. So this patio opens completely here in this area, so all the people can wait here around. They can see the exhibition which was placed here in the upper part, or they can see a movie about his work, and the toilets were set here just on the corner. So all the visitors gather here, they are organized, go around the house, see, and they are explained how the house was in all the steps built, and then they enter where he was always entering in small groups and visit the house in these steps, and then they get out, and through this they can also get to the shop. So the building was mostly organized, everything around this central part, and this entrance was used as the main entrance into the house, because the facade that you are going to see is the mostly original facade where certain interventions happened also by Plečnik. So this is the house that you visit, the house where he lived. He worked with the students in this winter garden and in the first floor of this tower. And this is the patio where you can wait and circulate around. In the attic, it was also proposed to have here a storage room to deposit all the plans, but it was not accepted very well by the city and the owner. So they said, why don't you move this? And we could then reorganize the whole plan of the attic and open these spaces which were planned first to be offices for the workers here. We opened them, and they are organizing here some temporary exhibitions. This is a room where they can prepare exhibitions, and this is the room for the custodians. So you come up here, you can move around, you can see their work, and then you can go down here. So you can have a kind of a space loop and a communication here, quite open also on the first floor of the house. So although the house seems really very, very small, in fact it works as a kind of a very interesting organism, and it's very well connected with the garden, which is a beautiful place for events. So the house does not work any like just a static museum. There are events going on also in the garden and gatherings. So later on, of course, we always do a plan where you see with the red color marked all the demolitions that we are supposed to do. So we demolished these division walls, and we gained spaces as they were first. And of course, we demolished also this wall here because it was completely humid and rotten. So we were allowed at the end to do also some changes more than first it was prescribed by this conservation plan. In the house, we did mostly just the reinforcement, the static reinforcement, the fire protection, and of course the humidity isolation along the house. And all the process about all the things that happen along the facade was very carefully prescribed, or by the conservation plan and later by our execution plan. So here you see how the facade looked like, and this was the door where the car was standing. So all this work mostly on this precious part were done by the restorators. These were students of restoration and workers. They were mostly just cleaning. It was a really a beautiful summer where these passionate people were cleaning and just preparing the house for the new life somehow to enter through this door. This is this door, and this is the facade that Plečnik did together with one of his students. And we think that this facade is a kind of a test for his national library later. So in your own house, you know, you can allow much more than in your public projects. So there are lots of testings of material in this house that he probably was using also later. Those windows we had to keep because there was not enough money to make them new, and in fact we just used a new, more let's say dark color, dark green color for all these elements. On the back side of the house, there were windows that were done in the 80s. They were never like this. They were supposed to be small, like you see here on the right side, but they actually didn't work very well. They were done by an architect. We know his name as other interventions in the house. They were done in the manner as it was supposed to be. Do it like Plečnik would have done it. And I think it's a very discutable way to do it. So we are having really lots of discussion how to do it. And at the end, we put away those windows. We put them just in the level of the roof. And to expose this winter garden much more, and to put the house along the street more on the back. This is the tower, how it was when we started. It was completely planted with this wine tree, and I wanted really to keep it. So we had several meetings with the people from the Arboretum, how to keep the plant. And at the end, we decided we can't reinforce, in fact, the building. We had to do two circular beams around it, and we had to isolate it. So we decided to cut the roots. We put them along the construction site, and at the end, after 2 years of construction, from these roots, the plant is growing back again. Of course, they did some children of this plant, so we are using, in fact, this kind of a same plant. But here you see the beams that were done, and of course, the facade was quite damaged because of this plant, and there was a lot of work how to achieve the same plaster at the same color, because the color was already with years of patina in this way. And the master who was doing this, he brought the earth from his village, and through this earth he achieved the same plastering that you see now here on this side, that is almost the same as it was on the original house. In the underground level, we put away the oil tank, and we had a new heating pump, so we gained a new space, and all the stones around the house were done as all these original materials. They were They were numbered, they were drawn, they were put away, there was new sand put on, and then they were brought again. And all the elements in the original house, they were numbered, very well documented, put it away, and the ones who had to remain, they were completely cleaned with steam and then protected again. And this is the garden, how it works afterwards. Here you see the house, how it is now after the reconstruction. We did a new opening here, the new window, because there was originally an opening on the photo and there was a vine growing through. We just put the glass over it. But here, not much was done. It was just done the cleaning of the pavement, of the stairs, some reinforcements, just partially, where there were some cracks, and this is this window. All the wood was, of course, protected because there were worms inside and then painted, but mostly the things were carefully cleaned. For instance, this is the winter garden where there was also a school going on in this during the war times. This winter garden is really special because the window frames, they are out of concrete. And for the first plan that we got, it was planned to do an under foundation under these walls. And I said, this is really dangerous because if there are some cracks on these frames, nobody can do such very tiny concrete frames today. So we brought the static several times, and in the end he found out that these pillars under the columns are very strong. So we could reinforce just these small cracks that happened. And mostly this part was just cleaned, and everything remained on the place as it was. In the kitchen, we removed the radiators. We do the new heating system through the chimney that was set up there on the attic. So the kitchen mostly is organized like we found it on the photos that you saw before. And this is the interior of this main room where he was working and sleeping, and this is his bathroom. And this is just before they moved back all the elements, so that you see all these removable things were moved out, and when the new electricity was done, and this room is also fire protected, so with gas, so then they brought back again all these elements, so you can visit the house and see how he was really working along this desk. And when the guide takes you around, he explains you all the stories about all this. For instance, these are the mosaics, the stones when he was renovating the Roman wall in Ljubljana, for instance. And this is the bed. He was sleeping on one part and working on the other. And these are all these fragments that were just put on the desk as they were found. And this is in the first floor, the room in the first floor. And this is one of my favorite pieces of his working tools. I don't know if somebody knows what is it about. This is just my idea. I think it's a proportion key, and because it resembles on a figure, I think it's also the golden section here. That was a tool that was used to design beautiful buildings that we have somehow forgotten. And this is the staircase, the original staircase, the first thing that he built in the house that was just cleaned, renovated. And these are the upper three rooms. As you see, they are very beautifully set in an X, leading from one room to the other. And these wooden columns and beams, they are protected with plaster before the fire. There's a kind of a fire protection, and we just restored it. And these rooms were painted many years with different colors. So we found red, green, and blue, and at the end we found that the original color was white. So now it's white back again. In the attic, this was the attic that was not used and is connecting those rooms with the custodian rooms. So we decided to build here a working room, a room for preparation of the exhibits. But in Ljubljana, our roofs are protected, so we are not allowed to do any windows on these pitched roofs. And we did, 10 studies where to put a window that you can't see it, but they said no. So at the end, we kept just this fracture here where you can see to the ground floor, and a small window is left here on the left side. So this is the natural light that you see on the photo that is coming from the bottom up into the room, and the similar protection of these wooden beams where you have light, and the protection and the cover that we had to isolate, of course, this room. And with this isolation, of course, you always don't know where to finish with this wooden construction. And mostly all these interventions that we did happened in a way in this courtyard that you see here. And in this courtyard, we started slowly, step by step, just to scratch off all the things that were put on, with carefully really deciding, was this hand of the master or not, in a way. It was really not easy. But we found interesting plaster here under these constructive elements, and we decided to keep this plaster and organize the entrance into this shop and clean this entrance porch. And at the end, it looks like this. This is the new entrance to the information desk and to the shop. And this is the glazed wall that is here put completely in a closet. And in the summer, all the space is completely open, or in the winter, it can be closed. And you can move around this central area. And this is the door that has a special story. This door looked like this when we found, and all the doors in this entrance part of the building were like just very simple, modest door of this suburban house. And when they started to clean this door, they first removed this part, and when they cleaned it, they found this wooden porch, and I found it very unusual, this wooden porch. It's not a traditional, very, let's say, simple porch, but under this porch, there was another porch. No? So this was a mask, in fact, just to cover the original farmer's porch. It was rotten, so we had to add some new pieces. But we had a discussion, was this the thing that Plečnik might have done it when he had an entrance here? And there were some writings that we really found, but we are not sure yet. But in a way, we managed to convince the lady who was from the heritage that we keep this door wooden, that we don't paint it back in the gray color, that we keep it as a kind of a door that you see more. And of course, we had a lot of discussion whether to put this wing back again, and we decided not to do it. So we put just a very simple wooden door that can open and be closed at the same time. This is a glazing that you can see inside the exhibition room, and then you enter to this exhibition part. This is the wall that was completely rotten, and we were allowed to use it as an exhibition panel, because in this room we had to organize the exhibition, and since you see the vaulted areas, there is almost no space to put something on the walls. So we use this as a panel and this special lighting, and this is the first part dedicated to the exhibition of the Prague Castle and the Vienna project, and this wall also opens, and then you are going back to the room where there exhibited the models of his unrealized projects. This is a special room with a vaulted ceiling. It was probably a kitchen, but first it was supposed to be a storage room, but we opened it for public. And this is the room where there was a division wall, and we found these beautiful windows. Probably these windows were also planned by Plečnik because they are on the inner part of this brick facade outside. So when they were set on the line of the outside facade, probably he also organized those niches where you see how the light is entering this room. But the custodians, they wanted us to cover these windows. They wanted to have a black space to exhibit everything as good as possible, and we were fighting not to do so, to present the architecture as well as the exhibition space. So we have now in the middle a model where kids can gather around and see all the projects that Plečnik did in Ljubljana. You see his three biggest public projects as the library and some other things you can find in the shelves under this central desk. And in the back side, on the other side, there was a corridor with a plaster that was not originally done by Plečnik. That was done in the 80s. And since we had to change some levels, then we introduced a new plaster that is similar, like this Venetian plaster, so we call it, but a very similar, more fine than terrazzo pavement. And this is the room, how it looks today, with the existing staircase going up to the space of the custodians and with a window where you can see inside the shop. This is the small lecture room and the toilets at the back side and the light coming into this room from both sides. And this is how the shop looks today, filled with all materials, and it has windows on 4 sides. You can look on the street and all the visitors that come. This is how this part of the entrance room looked before you saw it. And we found here also an existing wall. Probably it was scratched off just to dry the plaster, because it's a very humid area here. So we decided to present it as found, because we find it as a kind of, it can originate also or be connected with the brick wall on the entrance facade. With this brick wall and this brick wall, we think it's also somehow connected with the library. And it was done together with one of the students that you saw on the previous photos. So this is the entrance today to the museum and the house, where beside the exhibition also, you can see here the timeline with his projects, and this is the entrance area. And there are some events also going on in the house very often. And this is, of course, the part of the team. As it was explained, all these interdisciplinary projects cannot happen without really a good team. So here you see the conservator, she's also an architect. You see an architect who is a restorator. She was doing all the research about the colors, the paints, all the plasters. And this is the conservator who was taking carefully all the pieces in the conservation and cleaning room, and Katarina, and this is Anna, the main custodian of the house. And of course, this is Masha, my partner on the project, and Matthias, the partner for the exhibition. So this is just a part of the team working now two years on this project. And so it is how it looks today. When you enter, you see the patio. And in the house, they have a very good team and managing the programs, which is, in fact, I think it's very important issue with the renovation we do. Sometimes the houses die slowly back again. And here they have really a very good team of organizers. So here you see our famous ski jumper who is promoting the guide of architecture of Ljubljana on a certain occasion in the house. Or you see a discussion going on in the house on a promotion of a new book. So there are many events really going on, connected not only with Plečnik, but with the space and architecture in general. And in fact, here at the end, you see the entrance that Plečnik also built to our school where we are, where we teach today. And this is another building, but this is his architecture, his intervention in our school where our students enter through this porch that he has done. And this is a studio where I teach, where he did a window, and a window with the column, which is very typical, his element, where our students work and do the architecture of today, where I hope somehow that they are also influenced by the things that the master did, and with the new and the old together, our times are somehow connected, I hope. Thank you.